just going to run a pencil through this area. The idea here is I don't need to flatten the entire bottom side of the bench. It's not really necessary, but I do want a flat area where the legs are going to go. So the legs are on the same plane. I'm not going to get any issues with the tenon shoulders of the legs actually meeting the bench because the bench is not flat there. So essentially I'm just going to flatten the joinery points along the bench. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and lay out where the sliding leg vise groove goes on both sides, and I'll do the same thing. I'll kind of color in a channel and make sure that it's flat across that area as well, so that once I recess the angle iron in there, it's all going to be all along the same depth. So time to break out the planes and flatten out these areas. So now the real heavy lifting begins. I've got the undercarriage basically assembled and set onto the bottom of the bench. I went ahead and put clamps across the short stretchers because they were a little bit looser fit, and I wanted to make sure that they're pulled tightly. The long stretchers are really snug fit, so once I kind of beat them into place with a mallet, they're not moving. Plus, I don't have a clamp long enough to span this distance, which is yet another reason to use drawboring to pull these joints tight together. But needless to say, the undercarriage is pulled together very tight with no gaps, so I know that the locations of the tenons in the bottom of the bench are where they're going to be. So I've set it on here, and I've gone around with a straight edge and held it against the bench here. Because of the fact that there's the gap with the tenon shoulder sits, I want to make sure that I'm very certain that the fronts of the legs are flush with the bench, at least now anyway. I realize that wood movement over time will probably move them all out of alignment, but the idea is to keep them as close to the front as possible. Once I've done that, and I'm sure that everything is exactly where I want it to be, the good news is this undercarriage is so heavy, I can come along with a marking knife or a scratch-awl, whichever you prefer, and go ahead and mark out the locations of the tenons. And I don't really have to worry about it slipping and sliding around on me because it is so blooming heavy to begin with. So let's go ahead and mark all these mortises. I like to use a scratch-awl in a long grain situation. Find that it will cut along the grain, whereas a knife has a tendency to follow the grain line and sometimes can move away from the joint. Alright, it's time to cut the mortises to fit the leg tenons. As I showed you before, I've got the mortise positions all marked out. If you remember the podcast I did a while ago where I cut the really big mortise for the vise nut on the main leg, using the same technique here. I've assembled a small little jig, and on the underside of this is just held together using pocket screws, and it's double stick taped in place. I went ahead, and after I assembled the jig, I went and tried to actually fit it onto the tenons, and it's just the tiniest bit too small to fit on those tenons. I probably could hammer it into place, so it's about the right fit I'm looking for. I want to have to do just a little tiniest bit of paring in order to get a nice smooth fit. Now it's double stick taped in place. I've got a pattern trim bit in the router. What I'm going to do is make probably the first couple of passes with this shorter bit that will lay out the actual walls of the mortise, and then switching to that big beefy 2.5 inch long pattern bit over there, I'll reference off the walls that I've already cut to go to the final depth. Once I finish this mortise, it's just a matter of popping it off, taping it into place, in each location. So let's get started. Just like I did when cutting the mortise for the vise, I'll go ahead and use my jig as a guide to square up my corners. So you can see where I squared up the first part of that corner, and there's a little bit left from my second pass. I'll just come in with the chisel, reference off those already squared straight walls, and knock out that rounded over corner. This is extremely helpful because I can continue to reference off the straight sides as I work my way deeper into the mortise, and I don't end up, you know, chopping and chopping and chopping out huge chunks for the corners later on after everything has been cut. And with that, we have all of the mortises in the bench top completed. I've gone ahead and fit all of the joinery in, and I wanted to double check that I was getting a tight fit. You can see I've got a bit of a gap here, but as I pulled them together, they tighten up, and really what that comes down to is just the weight of these legs and the bench and everything. Getting it all firmly together was kind of a chore, but what I'll be doing is coming in and draw boring these joints, and what I wanted to make sure is that when these shoulders are drawn tight up against the leg, that this dimension here equals the dimension on the base, so that I'm not, you know, turning the legs in, everything is remaining square. So I went around and just measured everything from the joinery point at the stretcher to the joinery point at the bench, and discovered that everything was equal, so that once I have drawn up these joints tight and brought the shoulder tight to the leg with the draw bore pins, that everything remained in square. And now it's time to drill out the peg holes and start draw boring everything. We can put this thing up on its feet and take the weight off my poor sawhorses that have been taking this 300+ pound load for a very long time now. Now it's just drilling a whole bunch of holes. Set the holes, the marks 1 inch back from the edge, and got a piece of tape here to basically measure my depth, and let's just have at it. I'm using a brace and bit here because the depth that's really required, I need a 4-inch depth on the legs for the stretchers, and I need a 6-inch depth on the bench itself, and there's just really no way to do that on a drill press, drawer bits being what they are. Through that outer shoulder. So yeah, like I was saying, drill bits being the way they are, they're just not made that long. Whereas an auger bit, I can get a 6 to 7 inch length hole out of it. Okay. First hole is done. One of the things in drilling with a brace and bit is keeping it down lower on your saw bench. You can get the best leverage and be able to push down on it. These Jennings pattern bits, this screw will actually pull the bit through, but if you've got a little bit of extra weight and leverage on top of it, it'll go a little bit faster. The other thing is when you can get down over top of the bit like this, it kind of just naturally sets itself plumb. I'm not putting a huge amount of emphasis on keeping this hole perfectly plumb because of the fact that I'll be, you know, bending a peg through it. But still, when I can get over top of it, I can really keep it very vertical. I am getting a little bit of tear out on the inside of this mortise, but I'm not terribly concerned about that because, well, it's the inside of the mortise and no one's going to see it, and it's really not going to affect the fit. One thing, you want to make sure that you are proficient in sharpening one of these auger bits because you've got 24 holes to drill. That's 2 down and 22 more to go. Now that I've got the holes drilled, put this stretcher in place, pulled it up tight, and I just take a 3/8 inch brad point bit, stick it down in there, and a little tap to mark the hole. And then you pull the joint out. You can see the marks left there. And from there, you just want to offset it a little bit. And you know, there's a bunch of varying thoughts on how far you want to go, between, you know, a 1/16 and 3/32, no more than an 1/8 in some instances. With the size of this joinery, I'm probably going to go about 3/32, but again, it's towards the shoulder, and it's kind of an amount that looks about right. So I mark those with a brad awl, and then back over to the saw bench to saw or drill out the 3/8 inch holes in the tenons, and then we'll be ready to fit the joint. The best pegs for drawboring are made of a species that has some pliability that's good for bending. So generally an open pore wood. Ash does a good job for bending. White oak is also really good for bending. And I happen to have some quarter sawn white oak here in the shop. I've gone ahead and cut it into approximate lengths. The pins that I need to draw bore the joints of the base, I need to be, probably about 5 inches long. That gives me a little extra length to hammer them into place, and it will span across the joint. The drawboard pins for the top need to be 6 inches long. I'll be drilling the hole 6 inches deep, so I cut these pieces 7 inches long to allow a little bit of extra hammering in and then trimming them flush. Of course, the pin stock needs to be bone dry. You don't want it shrinking up and leaving gaps in the hole, so it needs to already be equalized. So first things first, went ahead and I just marked some kind of approximate dimensions. The pegs need to be 3/8 of an inch in diameter, so this is a little bit proud of that. And I'm going to go ahead and rive this stock. See, once they're riven out, these are the start of my pegs. So now is when I wish I had built that shaving horse. But got this spoke shave set to take a pretty aggressive cut. Draw knife would do this job really well too. Got this dowel plate that I got from Lee Nielsen back when I made my first Windsor chair, and it's got measured holes in it, and essentially they are slightly tapered so that if you hammer in from this side, you get this kind of cutting edge on the top. And the easiest way I know to work is set it over one of the dog holes in your bench. I've tapered this dowel so that it's slightly smaller than 3/8 and it fits in there nicely, and just using a hammer. Now that I've run it through the dowel plate. I want to just shape the end into a point. So that it can find its way through the offset that is part of the draw bore. It's time to put these draw bores to work. I'm going to go ahead and use glue on the base, although traditionally with the draw bore it's really not necessary. But, you know, it's not going to hurt to overbuild the base that's going to be holding all this weight. Just paint on some glue. Now, you can certainly use the drawbar pin to pull these tight, but I've already done that. I've already pulled them tight to test the fit and make sure that I don't have any gaps. So I'm going to go ahead and stick my pins in. Okay, you start to feel some resistance there. That pitch change, you know you're through. And that's that. Joint is drawn up really tight. And there we are. This joint is pegged and glued, and it's not going anywhere. You know, the only thing I'll say, and actually I got in a comment on the blog from Jamil Abraham long time ago when I finished these legs. They were really sharp, and I took a block plane and just broke the edges a little bit, and Jamil commented and said, you know, it might not have been a good idea to do that because now you're going to get a small V cut, and sure enough I've got a little reveal right there. That's not a gap you're seeing on the film, that's actually a V-shaped reveal from where I chamfer the edge. So live and learn. Still really tight, very strong joint, and I kind of like the white oak pegs. So the bench lives. You saw me flip it onto its side, and I actually started filming the flipping onto its feet, and I ended up needing my wife to come in and help me, and that took quite a bit of time. We had to come up with a leverage system to get it up on its feet. I do believe this bench is probably, I know it's in excess of 300 pounds, it may be closer to 400 pounds. You know, you may think with a bench so incredibly heavy and cumbersome, that might be a detriment. And granted, it's not easy to, it was not easy to flip up right side up, but I can move it around the shop quite a bit. And where I am right now, just kind of pushed up against the wall, the bench was always designed to fit in this space and to have plenty of room for me to be able to reach the end vise screw over here. but at the same time I can very easily move it out. Probably the lion's share of the work I'll be doing on it will be straight out the way it was positioned as I was working on it. And ultimately, let's move this mat out of the way, it moves really easily, and probably what I see myself doing more than anything else is, you know, moving it out this way. And working with it like this, so that my in vise is down here, I can get to it, and my leg vise will be here, and the slider up front, be able to get to both sides of it relatively easily. I even could probably move it out even a little bit more so I can get around this side. But you can see, you know, I mean, it's heavy, no question, but it moves around, slides around on the floor as needed, but, you know, it is absolutely solid as a rock. So it's not going to go anywhere while I'm working on it, while I'm planing on it, etc. So for all intents and purposes, the bench is really done. I've got to do some mortising on the leg vise chop, and just go ahead and get that installed. And I've got some work to do on the sliding leg vise, but beyond that, I do need to go through and do a final flattening of the top, and then I'll be putting finish on. So it's been an interesting journey. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm really excited to have this thing up on its feet. Not only that, just to take the weight off those poor sawhorses that had this, you know, multi-100-pound bench sitting on them for several months there. So I don't have to worry about those collapsing and falling apart on me. So this is it. I will get to work on the vices, and I'll see you guys in the next installment here.